Mike Smith, welcome back to another Maya tutorial. This time we're going to explore the basics of the graph editor for animation. Now we use the graph editor to make the movement of an object more realistic. We can make an object accelerate or deaccelerate really easily without the addition of extra keyframes. Now I'm recording this in version 2015. If you're in an older version, the process is exactly the same. So to start with, I have a really basic animation here. It's just an object moving from left to right and back to the left again over 48 frames or 2 seconds. Now that's just a really simple loop. And now we need to make sure our menu set up the top in the left hand corner is set to animation. And then we can open our graph editor by going to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. If you haven't looked at this before, it's a lot simpler than it looks at first. We basically have some numbers along the bottom. Now we can ignore the negative numbers. We just want to look from 0 to the right along the bottom. All these numbers correspond to our timeline or our time slider. So you can see as I move up and down our time slider, this red vertical line or the marker on here moves with us, and we can see where our keyframes are. So we know there's keyframes on 1, 24 and 48, and we can see these black dots on 1, 24 and 48. Now the numbers on the left hand side, these vertical numbers, they correspond to the grid, and for these numbers we can't ignore the negative side. We need to actually consider these. We know that 0 is the center of the grid. If you move in any one direction, that might be positive, and the exact opposite direction will be negative. And these numbers also correspond to what we have in our channel box. So if we have a look at our channel box, these attributes are exactly what we have in our graph editor. So just to summarize that, if we have a look at our object, this object is moving left to right and then back to left again. That's our x-axis. We know that because of the key in the bottom left corner. We know that y is up and down, x is left to right, and in this case z is foreground to background. So the object is just moving, it's not scaling or rotating, so it's translating along x. And if we have a look at what we have in the graph editor, we can zoom in the same way you do in your normal view, in your perspective view. We can use the scroll wheel on the mouse for that, and we can also hold Alt, middle click and pan around. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit more and position that so we can see everything a bit clearer. And now if we have a look at what we actually have, this information, so we've got this curve here, and then we've got some straight lines. If we have a look at these different colours, we can link those to what we have in the left hand side of our graph editor. We've got all the information or all the attributes minus the numbers from our channel box. We've got translate, rotate and scale, X, Y and Z. And you'll notice X is red, Y is green and Z is blue for all three, for translate, rotate and scale. Now some of these lines that are completely flat, that means there's no movement there. We've got some different keyframes. We can see 1, 24 and 48, but it's not moving up and down. The numbers along the left hand side, these vertical numbers, don't change. So this green line here, this green curve, that's our translate, rotate and scale Y, and it's not moving at all. We just really want to look at this curve. That's our translate X. So to make this easier for us, we can actually click on translate X in the graph editor just to hide everything else. And you have to make sure you have an object selected, otherwise nothing will be displayed in the graph editor. So select your object first, select translate X or whichever axis you're moving in, and then we can actually have a look to see what this actually does, what we can do with this. Now you'll notice the lines aren't straight. If we look at the bottom here, it starts flat it gradually or progressively goes steeper, and the steepest parts of a curve means the movement is quickest, it's the fastest. And then up towards frame 24, where it peaks, it goes flat again. So that means the object will actually slow down, and then it will gradually speed up and then slow down again at frame 48. So what we have is the object on the left starting slow, speeding up, staying fast for quite a long time, slowing down again and changing direction because this curve goes back on itself, it doesn't continue going up. And then it speeds up again and slows down towards the end. So if we play our animation before we really adjust anything in the graph editor, you'll see it's quite subtle, but the object does actually slow down at the very beginning and at the end. It's quite a soft movement. Now if we stop and rewind that and go back to our graph editor, we can actually have a look at some of these keyframes. So if I highlight this one, this top one here, that's the 24th frame. So that's when the object is over at the right hand side of our grid. We have what we call a tangent. This pink or this purple line here is a tangent. And we can adjust those manually if you want to. You can basically select one side, middle click and move that around. Or we've got some default tangents at the top of our graph editor. Now the two you really want to look at first of all are linear, and then you've got flat. Now this is set flat at the moment, and that will actually try to pull the curve or bend the curve to make it flat on the keyframe. That means the movement will slow down as slow as possible. However, if we go to a linear tangent, that keeps the line straight and it goes direct to that particular keyframe and then direct to the next one. The bottom keyframes here on 48 and on 24 are both still set to flat. So what we should get now is the object on the left hand side of the grid moving slowly, accelerating quite quickly to the right, and then changing direction without deaccelerating or reaccelerating. So let's have a look. It should be quite subtle. Okay, so it looks like the object is almost bouncing off of an invisible object on the right. However, on the left, it's still quite a soft movement. Like I said, it's very subtle. It does slow down and then speed up. And you can try that if you want to with rotating or scaling. Now let's have a look at the graph editor again. If we select the other two keyframes, that's 1 and 48, I'll make those both linear as well. So now the object should move in what we call a linear motion. That means it doesn't change speed, it's just at one pace. And it should look like it's just literally bouncing left to right. Okay, so you can see quite a big difference now, especially on the left where we're used to that moving slower or softer. So it looks like it's just bouncing on invisible walls from left to right. If we compare that to what we had before, if I select my entire curve, so that's all three keyframes, and go back to flat tangent, and let's play the animation again, you should see quite a noticeable difference. It's much softer at the end and the beginning. Now you'll need to really play around with this to get used to it and to work out when you actually need to change these tangents. But basically, if you're working with a mechanical object, something robotic or maybe an engine, it's going to be quite linear, it's going to be quite mechanical, so nothing's really going to accelerate unless you really want it to. However, if you're working with an organic object or a living creature, a human or an animal, generally everything accelerates and deaccelerates without you really realizing. If you set everything to linear, you can make a human character look quite robotic and quite unnatural. So play around with it, see what you can come up with. Try to keep it simple while you're practicing and while you're learning these things. And make note of any adjustments you make. Make note of what you're actually doing in the graph editor. Screenshot this and save it if it helps. Okay, so keep practicing, try to learn something new, and remember to save your progress.